Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Chantelle and I am the face behind One's Creative Mind. Today I'm doing a video that is a little bit different. Usually I just post crochet tutorials on how to make amigurumi and that's it. But I want to start diversifying my content and just sharing all the knowledge and tips and things that I have learnt throughout my amigurumi journey. So in today's video, as the title suggests, I want to share with you all of the things I have learnt over the years that have helped to elevate the quality and appearance of my amigurumis. Some of the things I have learnt along the way, and others are things that I actively went in search of in order to improve my crocheting. There are a lot of tips out there listing the must-knows before you start making amigurumi and how to make it neater, which is why I was hesitant about doing this video. However, I decided to go ahead, but to keep it tailored to my personal experiences and target those who want to elevate their amigurumi to a whole new level in regards to detail and realism. So this video isn't aimed at those wanting to learn how to crochet amigurumi, but rather those who already know how to and want to get tips on how to take it one step further. However, if you are a beginner, you can still listen and learn these skills and apply them once you know how to crochet amigurumi. This video will also be transcribed into a post, so if you prefer to read it instead, or even if you would like to check it out later to review the tips discussed, then you will be able to view it on my website. Tip number 1, using mixed media. This may not be everyone's cup of tea, but for me it is very high up on the must list. Using a mixture of mediums creates so much dimension and realism to my projects. In my case, I like to use felt sheets for things such as clothes, eyes, or other sort of details, craft foam for teeth and spikes, needle felting for things that I would normally have to embroider. This is because I'm not good at embroidery, and having needle felting as a second option opened up a whole new world for me. I am able to create things like eyebrows and even faces like Buzz Lightyear, which are much easier to achieve using this method. Polymer clay is another thing that I use to create buttons, teeth, earrings, and other things like that for my dolls. I have even used other materials that I find lying around my house, such as a keychain ring for Stinky Pete's pull cord and a sphere-shaped plastic packaging wrapper from my recycling bin for Buzz Lightyear's visor. The use of mixed media isn't mandatory and your amigurumis will still look great without it, but it makes such a nice touch and allows you to capture all of the finer details that would otherwise be impossible or not as eye-catching if you were crocheting. Tip number 2, learn to appreciate sewing. Whip stitching is a nightmare for many crocheters, and as a result they will spend hours looking for no-sew patterns. I am guilty of doing this at the beginning of my journey. In my opinion, this will just limit you and the depth of detail that you can achieve when it relates to contouring. Using shape contouring was a game changer for me, and it allowed me to create all of these patterns. When I refer to shape contouring, I am talking about the technique of contouring by using basic shapes and sewing them together to create a more complex shape, as you can see from the pictures on screen. None of these patterns would have been possible with this much detail if I didn't sew. I could create these patterns so that they require less sewing, but it would most definitely impact the detail that I am able to capture, and the finished result would be more basic. If you are serious about amigurumi, especially if you want to create realistic and highly detailed ones, then you need to accept the fact that there will be a lot of sewing involved. So relax, take it slowly, grab a cup of tea and sit down to catch up on your weekly shows, or find a new show to binge watch as you whip stitch your way to creating some mind-blowing amigurumis. Tip number 3. T-shirt transfer paper eyes. The most frequently asked question by people, without a doubt, is how I do the eyes on my chibi dolls. The answer is that I use t-shirt transfer paper. I came about this method because after having created a doll base that I was happy with, I could just not get the eyes right. I'm terrible at embroidering and felt that it was too time consuming, as well as the fact that I was looking for something less cartoony but with a bit more realism. This resulted in me designing some eyes on my laptop, which I printed, cut out and pinned onto my doll, and it was perfect. It was exactly what I was looking for. This made me look for a way to print onto fabric, which after looking around I discovered wasn't cheap or easy to find. So after some more searching, I came across the t-shirt transfer paper, and this allows you to print your design onto a paper, and then you can transfer that image onto your chosen fabric by ironing it on. And all of my chibi eyes are made this way, and I've even used this method for other details such as decal stickers for my Buzz Lightyear and RC. Tip number 4, brushing to create a fur effect. Sometimes when crocheting, especially when you are creating animals, you may want to enhance the realism of your project by creating fur. And this can be achieved simply by brushing your finished project and creating a lot of pilling to the yarn. This results in the crochet stitch pattern being hidden by the peeled or frayed yarn and creates the illusion of fur. I first came across this technique when creating my beast doll. Originally, I planned to use faux fur yarn, but everywhere I looked, crocheters were saying how difficult it was to use. I felt that my beast would be hard enough to make without adding that hurdle into the mix, so I decided to back loop only crochet my beast and attach the faux fur afterwards. Halfway through my project, I came across a post where a crocheter talked about using a wire brush to create a fur effect, and once I tried it, I fell in love. There is no doubt that you would still love your amigurumi whether it has fur or not, but let's be honest, beast with fur surpassed every one of my expectations, and the outcome just honestly blew me away. Brushing is a risky business because you may just brush too hard and create a hole in your work, and this could lead to your project start unraveling, and that would be a complete nightmare. This happened to me when I first tried it, but fortunately I was able to take some yarn and stitch the hole closed to prevent further fraying. I just rebrushed over where I stitched to hide it. So just to note that this method does work best with acrylic or wool yarn. It does work with cotton, but it doesn't tend to pill as easily, so the look will be a bit different, and it does require a lot more brushing. Tip number 5, draw and plan in detail. It may seem like an obvious and basic detail, but surprisingly, this is something I'm relatively new to. I am a very hands-on crafter and I tend to just go with the flow. I would look at a picture and just use it as a reference. Doing things like this makes for a lot of trial and error, which costs a lot of time. It can also result in your project not being the size that you want, and there have been a few times where my project has turned out too big or too small. And when you're creating a series of characters that go together, it can mess with the continuity. It has also resulted in me not contouring correctly, for example with Abu. Because I just used a picture that was forward facing, I forgot to contour at the back so he doesn't have a bum. So I only recently started creating some gauges using my favorite yarns and hooks, but now pictures are drawn out and printed true to size, preferably from various different angles, but at minimum from the front, back and side. I also write down how many stitches wide certain parts should be, as well as how many rows high certain parts should be, and it's just very useful being able to use my gauge, measure, hold it up to the picture and make certain calculations. So just to summarize, breaking down my pictures and planning this way makes contouring and keeping track of the size so much easier, and I make less mistakes. It's amazing the amount of time saved by just 15 minutes of planning. Tip number 6. If possible, crochet your seams. Crocheting your seams together rather than whip stitching gives your project a completely different look. I suppose because I gained an appreciation for whip stitching, I may have just forgotten the fact that it doesn't mean that I have to sew everything. This is primarily evident in my Cogsworth pattern. My original one was whip stitched together, and even though I took my time to stitch it, it just didn't have that sharp seamless edge that I was looking for. So when remaking Cogswork, I decided to crochet the seams together instead, and what a difference it makes. As you can see from the picture, the edges are neater, sharper and well defined. Tip number 7. Crochet down the sides of your work to create bent joints. Arms with bent elbows, knees with bent legs, feet with heels. All of this was achieved easily once I discovered chaining and turning my work and then crocheting down the sides to bring it back together into a spiral. The possibilities became endless. I'm not sure how to explain it verbally, but hopefully you can get a general idea with the pictures on screen. And I may do a post and video detailing it more in depth at a later date. This method allows for some specific contouring that would otherwise be hard or near impossible to achieve. Tip number 8, having an understanding of the effect of stitch sequences. This tip again may seem obvious, but even as advanced as my abilities may seem, I was still using a lot of guesswork and just going with the flow when doing stitches and not being able to fully understand why when creating my patterns. Since writing my masterclass, I have been able to break down what I'm doing and gain a better understanding. I crocheted a lot of basic shapes and tested the effects of various sequences to formulate some crochet rules that I use to remind myself when crocheting. Having these rules and visual aids help me plan and scale my patterns, and it has taken a lot of guesswork out of my creative process. Tip number 9, learning to crochet with both hands. One of the reasons why I dislike crocheting clothes for my dolls is because I don't like that ridge pattern that is created by chaining and turning your work. However, as I decided it is important to continuously grow and learn this year, I started to look for ways to further evolve my amigurumi, and the first thing I looked for was how to crochet without leaving that ridge pattern. It took a bit of searching and rephrasing, but I finally found the answer, and it seemed so obvious. Instead of chaining and turning my work at the end of each row, just switch hands and crochet in the opposite direction. Doing it this way completely eliminates the ridge pattern. For me, it adds to the continuity and realism, but that's because I can be a serious stickler for details. Here is a picture. The top rectangle was crocheted with the chain and turn method, and the bottom one was crocheted by switching hands at the end of the row. Some of you may be saying, really Chantelle, you want us to learn to crochet with the other hand like it's as easy as 1, 2, 3? And the answer is yes and no. If, like me, you don't like the ridge pattern and you want to remove it, then this is the solution. Is crocheting with the opposite hand easy? No. But can it be done? Yes. I crochet right-handed, but I'm left-handed. And this is because when I first learnt to crochet, there weren't many left-handed tutorials out there. So I just decided to learn the right-handed way. Meaning that all those lovely creations you see me making, believe it or not, I have been making with my non-dominant hand. So I assure you that it can be done. And I am now in the process of crocheting more with my left hand. It's still slow right now because it takes a bit of getting used to, but I hope that in my near future this will speed up and I am seeing so many clothes for my chibi dolls in my future. And tip number 10, straighter color changes. This was another tip that I went looking for, how to make straighter and more seamless color changes. I was creating a bee pattern with stripes and I wanted my color changes to be perfect. This doesn't usually matter with the characters that I crochet because the seams are hidden, but I wanted to actively elevate my amigurumi, and this was one area that I wanted to improve in. There's an abundance of methods out there, and which one you choose is up to you. Here are 3 different color change methods. The method you decide to use may depend on what you are making, but either way, getting these color changes as straight as possible can really set your project apart. So I advise you to look around and find which method best suits you and just see the difference that it makes to your finished project. And there you have it. Those are my top 10 tips that I have personally used that have helped elevate my amigurumi. I hope that you enjoyed the video and I hope that you learnt something new. And until the next video, happy crocheting.